Last week we talked about framing, or talked about selling with focus, and the purpose of it is to understand what your customers or what your client's situation is, how your solution, in your case, how the houses that you have on the market align with or fit or answer that situation, and then why is it important to them that they purchase through you instead of going to some of the other competition out there. So we talked about understanding what the product is and all the houses in the market, where they're at, how they fit, and then what your competition is doing as well. And those are things that help with really understanding why it's important for them to buy from you, because you offer something that is totally different from anyone else. Even though it's the same products, you offer something very different. And that is important. And that's where you can capture, because people buy off emotion and they buy off connection. That's where you can capture all of that attention and help them focus then on what you're offering instead of being distracted by some of the other things, which makes today one of the keys to making that happen. Communication is the key to selling. I read a quote, and here's something that, and Brian Tracy is a phenomenal salesperson and sales trainer, and he's been around for a long time. He said you have to match your product with your client's need at that time. The right product with your client's right need at that time. In order for you to find that out, you have to have good communication skills. So we're going to try a little exercise. Here's some interesting observations, and not just in this, but just in whenever we're approaching sales, and especially whenever we meet a new client or we're trying to get to understand them a little bit better, we try to figure out what they're going to do. So we approach it a lot of times, and we'll ask questions, or we'll make the statements that we need to make initially. You know, what got you in the market for a new house, or what got you looking today, or what brought you in today, or whatever questions you ask, but you're listening typically for a specific response so you know how to go forward. And we approach our conversations and communication a lot of times in a way where we're listening to respond instead of just listening to understand what their real situation is. And you can ask all the right questions. You can have all the right word tracks to guide somebody. Remember last week I said sales is not about convincing someone to get something they don't want, don't need, or can't afford. It's about persuading someone to make a decision they already want to make. And that's what communication does, is it opens up all of those conversations so they begin to realize, I want to buy from Tony, or I want to buy from John, or I want to buy from whomever. That is all done through communication. So if you are not good at communicating, then you will continue to be bad at sales. So this is one of the keys, which is why I titled it that. This is one of the keys to selling and being effective at communicating. Here's something that I love, and one of the things I love bringing out about that exercise that we just did, and the mirroring exercise, is that if you begin to mirror your client and their behavior, they become more comfortable. And what I mean by that is this. Oh yeah, and we're going to break it down a little bit more. But that exercise opens up the importance of how we are perceived by our clients. So if a client, and there's a lot of body language things, and I'll go through those here in a little bit, but if a client is sitting in a specific posture, especially if they're leaned back or if they're leaned forward, if you mirror that posture or mirror how they're sitting, so if they have say they have their hand on their face like this, it's probably meaning they're thinking. So if you ask a question and they're sitting there like this, and then all of a sudden you ask the question, then you go and mirror that, it actually helps trigger a sense of comfortableness that allows them to open up. And you'll notice that if you really pay attention to how your clients are standing, sitting, things like that, and you start to mirror them subtly, not obviously, because that's a little weird. But if you see them shift and they're like, and then all of a sudden you're like, and you do it, that's a little weird. But you have to just do it subtly and just make little adjustments where you notice that they're sitting either with their legs crossed, which have indicators of certain things, but whatever they're doing, if you begin to just subtly mimic or mirror it, it actually relaxes people because they feel that connection. And then, if you're really good at it, you can get them to mirror you. And that's when you have control over the conversation. By the way, the person who asks the questions has control. So, there are, and I'll go through this a little bit, the communication process. I want to break it down a moment. And I have the little graph on the right-hand side of the page. It looks like a rocket. Think of it this way. If you're communicating with someone, and that's what that mirror exercise was. Communication is not just the words you use, right? It involves three things: the words, the message itself. It involves the audio or the auditory experience of it, and it involves the visual experience. Can you guess, what's the most important part of communication? The thing that you're trying to get across. Out of those three.
Of those three, what you feel like is the most important?
Yeah. What are you trying to get across out of those three things? Out of the message, auditory, the message is the most important thing, right? Mm-hmm. Here's what's really interesting. So if you have the content or the message that you're trying to express, and this will help you, especially if you get into an argument with someone, because the most important thing is the content, the message. The message in the communication experience and in that process encompasses about 7% of the experience. It is the most important thing, but it's also the lowest experienced aspect of communication. The other two, obviously, are 93% of the communication process. So if you look at the auditory experience of communication, this is about 38%. Which leaves 55 for the visual. So I like to encompass, or I like to refer to it as the rocket. So the boosters carry the message, right? They carry the content. So if you look at a rocket and how it takes off, especially back before we had the space shuttles, and even if you look at the SpaceX rocket or Bezos, I can't remember what his is called, there are two sections of boosters. The main boosters that lift it off the ground, and then the second set of boosters that take it into the atmosphere, right? And then that's what's left. So communication works the same way. So what is auditory? And here's where it can get really fun with your clients. Number one, your voice is a powerful tool. And there are three aspects to how you can utilize your voice to make a difference. One, and there's three of those. One is the inflection, the tone, and the volume, right? Those are the three things. Inflection, tone, and volume. So if you're telling a story to your client, and it's a meaningful story, something that has significance for another client, and say they just found the perfect house, but they were struggling, and you lower your voice and you change the tone and inflection to lower it, and you tell the story in a little bit softer way, and you pause a little bit, and you inflect a little bit of meaning into your voice, they come in. Because now they're like, oh, I have to come in to listen. It pulls them in. If you're more boisterous with it, if you're a little bit louder and you're excited, that's going to push them in a direction that you want them to go. So you can literally walk, especially if you find something that you're excited about out of the house. Oh my gosh, you have got to see this. And you can start using your voice to guide, and they'll move with that direction. So they will adjust based on the inflection, tone, and volume of your voice. And you can utilize that tool whenever you're communicating with your clients. Body language is also important. In fact, the visual experience of how you use and position your body is 55% of the communication process, which means it's the most utilized aspect of communication. People are watching what you're doing before they listen to what you say, or before they hear what you say. So we're going to do a little exercise real quick. This one's fun too. It creates a whole different dynamic when we're able to see, because you could hear everything. Did you also notice the difference in his voice whenever you guys turned around and faced each other? Because whenever you were back to back, you were trying to provide facts, right? So you were thinking, and it was a little slower, and you mentioned some things. When you turned face to face, you were providing more of an experience. And it's the same thing whenever we meet our clients. On the phone, because we can't see them, we typically talk facts. And I have to train my salespeople on a regular basis. It's not about providing all the information when you're on the phone, because you want to be in person. So for most sales, the phone call is there to set the appointment. And a lot of times we get distracted because we can't see. We get distracted with either facts or information instead of having that relationship where we can come together and actually sit down, talk, and have a conversation. And I'm telling you, it is the salesperson's default. Whenever they're on a phone, let me get as much information as possible, or give as much information. Let's get it all. Okay, let's get the appointment. Now they don't need the appointment because they already have all the information.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And we give away everything on the phone and then wonder why they're not showing up. So we have to have, and that's where, and I wasn't actually planning on going here with this, but that's where that phone call, it is about adding value to the appointment, not adding value to the purchase. Because when you add value to the appointment, by the way, and this will come later, a lot of times we get into the price conversation over the phone, which is the worst place to have it. You want to be in front, sitting down, side by side.
Talk about commissions and stuff. It's like I don't ever talk about that over the phone. I always like to do it face to face.
Yeah.
So,
Look, I'm willing to go over all that information with you. Let's get together so we can get. That's how you get them in. I'll share this experience. I went to the dentist, had to have some work done on a tooth of mine, and they did all the checkup. They said, okay, here's what we're going to do. They asked all the questions. They looked at all the x-rays. They said, okay, here's what I think we should do. Do you want to do it? Yes. Okay, great. Go set the appointment. We'll get it all set up and get you taken care of. I go set the appointment. They say, okay, here's the days that we have open. This is the appointment times. And I was like, okay, great, let's do it. They're like, okay, here's the price. You don't get the price until after you're already committed. It could be $5,000, it could be whatever, but every doctor and dentist knows that if they give the price up front, their customers are not going to go do it because there's no value in what the price is. There's only value, and they create the value in the result, not in the price or the process. So that is a sales tactic that they're trained, that a lot of salespeople don't even know. So let's do some body language things, and I'm not going to go through all of them because you can Google them. If a customer, first of all, has their arms crossed, they're closed off, right?
Yeah.
That means, okay, I'm closed off, especially if they're leaning back, right? If they have their arms to their side, which is, if they're like this, immediately you have to get them with their arms down. I mean, you have to. There's no choice because otherwise it's already done. It's over once their arms are crossed. If they're thinking, a lot of times with their eyes, they'll adjust to the right because they're trying to come up with something. So if you ask someone a question, most of the time they'll go, unless they're left-handed. Then they'll go the other direction. If it's the opposite direction of that, typically they're making something up. Right? And then I have a salesperson I'm working with who has a hard time sitting still. I have ADD, I move a lot. And you'll notice me whenever I'm even up here, I'll use my hands a lot, but it's part of how I speak, so it's a little more comfortable. But if you move a lot and you're walking around, I have a salesperson that this is what he does when he's talking to a customer, which drives people insane. So recognize how you're positioning, and that goes back to that mirroring exercise. You want to mirror and match how your customer is moving. So if they're fast, speed up. If they're slow, slow down. I walk very fast. And when I'm working with, and I've had especially some elderly people that I've helped and have worked with, I have to intentionally stop and slow down. And when I say I walk fast, I mean I walk fast. It's people who are my height are like, my gosh, I can't keep up because let's go. But I have to intentionally think, okay, I'm going fast. I have to slow. And I tell myself that, slow down. So I have to pay attention to those things. You want to match where your customer is. If they're sitting down, and I'll give you some of these things, and hopefully I'm on camera still. If you are at a table and you're straight across from a table, it is a position of authority and power over someone else, especially if it's a desk. If you're off at an angle and you just move over and the table's here, now you've removed that position. In a sales setting, especially when you're talking numbers, you want to sit side by side. Generally to the right so that you can flip the pages so they can see easy. Because that helps them. Because if they're sitting there in front of it, if you're side by side with them, you're a co-journerer with them in the process. So it's like, I'm going through this process with you. So let's go. Otherwise, if you're straight across from each other, you're telling them instead of showing them.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly where you want to be. That's why asking all those questions and asking the right questions, and even at those moments, you said the right thing that allowed him to trust. And it removed the barrier. Everyone who comes into a sales presentation has walls built up. It doesn't matter what the product is. Here's a prime example. You go through the mall, you stop at, we'll say Dillard's. You go into Dillard's, someone says, hey, how you doing today? Can I help you with anything? Oh, I'm just looking.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly how we approach every sales thing, because we have built up, and this will come in later when we talk about framing your offer. We are built up and designed to protect ourselves from all of the messages that we receive trying to get us to buy something. If we don't, we'll buy everything. So we create those barriers even when we're sitting there watching TV.
Yeah.
And it's automatic. So as soon as anything becomes sales-like, we shoot up a barrier. And that's where he was. And that's your job to recognize that like you did and then bring it down.
He's under contract.
Good. That's awesome. So good job. There's a lot more that we could go into. We just don't have time, and that is a whole nother thing because there's a whole, I mean, you could spend 2 or 3 hours on body language, on voice, things like that. I just wanted to cover the basics of it so that you understand that out of those 3 things, out of the message, the auditory experience, and the visual and the auditory they're 93% of the communication experience that you have with your clients. So the other side of it, there are 2 sides to communicating. One is listening, and this is where a lot of people really struggle. We are not trained to really listen. And there are 5 steps to listening. The other side of it is awareness. We think it's talking, but it's not. It's awareness. And the first side, if you look at the listening aspect of it, the first step, and these are literal steps that you can take, there's 5 on each of them, steps that you can take to be a better listener and steps that you can take to be a more aware in the conversation. And these are going to be important for you, and I'll go through them. I may not need to write anything down, but just in case. The first one is this, as far as listening, is being fully attentive. Here's what happens. We are not trained to pay attention fully. We are distracted by everything. And we, especially with our cell phones, we're conditioned to flip through to the next thing automatically. Even whenever it's sitting out or if it's open and you're meeting with a client, all of a sudden you get a text, your first inclination is to go while you're talking with the client. So be aware of that. Because for you, and I've had experiences in a lot of different sales types of settings. I started out, I think it was 1993. Now I feel old. I started out, I think it was 1993. I started selling rainbow cleaning systems door to door. Knock on the door. Hey, you want your carpet cleaned? No. You get the ones that say, sure, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. I'll just clean one of your rooms. Hard-working sales. It was terrible. Yeah, tell me. And I'm lugging, there's boxes of these things, and I'm like, and they already know as soon as I knock on the door and they see everything, they're like, oh, great, here's one of those guys. So I get into houses. Some of them I was able to set appointments because they actually expressed an interest in it and got some leads that way, but others door to door. We go in the house, do the presentation, right? There are a lot of things that distract people in their own home. I've had clients that whenever I went in, they had the football game on or some other TV show on. Their phone rings. They're not there to be attentive to me. It's the same whenever we go with our clients, right? And it's now in a different setting. But when you're with your clients, if there's anything that's distracting, you want to remove those distractions. So if you're sitting at a table, you want to have a clean table. Because otherwise they're focused on whatever's wrong with the table, right? If there's papers spread out or a desk, whatever it is, if there's things spread out, they're paying attention to all of those things that distract them. So you want to bring and eliminate as best as possible all of the distractions that prevent you from being fully attentive. Because they recognize when you're not. The second step, whenever they're talking, you ask a question and you're paying attention. Oh, here's some good body language stuff. If you ask a question and you lean forward like this, you're listening and they know. It's like, I'm right here with you. I'm paying attention. So if you lean forward and do those little things like that, they will then feel like you're fully attentive. Same with your standing. You can lean in a touch. So if we're standing right here, you just just a little, put your weight on your front foot. That little shift creates the perception, okay, I'm leaning in. Even though you're not really leaning, because that'd be kind of weird. But just shift your weight to your front foot. That indicates I'm here. I'm paying attention to you. The second thing is acknowledge what they're saying. You can do that with a shake of the head. You can do it with okay. You can say, okay, so I understand, and this goes into the next one, which is summarizing. But you can say, okay, I understand your situation. Or you can summarize their situation and repeat back to them in your own words what they just said. So it's kind of, those two steps kind of mix in with each other. But you want to acknowledge where they're at. Either bodily, with nodding heads, whatever. Okay. I mean, that's just a simple acknowledgement of what they're saying. And you remember the exercise we did last week where we just asked questions? And you had to say your favorite vacation place, and all you could do is ask questions?
Yeah. Same thing.
Same type of thing. And that's where that kind of comes from, is you can have a conversation where you only ask questions if you really break it down and think through what it is. One of the steps in being attentive, acknowledging, and summarizing like that is to wait a second. Have 5 seconds, count to 5 before you respond. Silence can be a very powerful tool. And if you ask a customer a question, they have to think about it, let them think. Let it be silent. Don't fill it. And then if they ask a question or they say something and you want to rephrase it or summarize what they're saying, either in the form of a question or something else, wait 5 seconds, count to 5, and then do it. Because then that indicates, you know what, for your client, they're really thinking about what I said. It's a little awkward at first when you do it, but once you get in the habit, it actually comes pretty easily. And you'll notice that if you wait just 5 seconds, you just count to 5, they start to go and lean in. They're like anticipating what you're going to say. And most salespeople are not trained to do that. They're trained to respond very quickly. And I know a popular sales trainer that focuses on word tracks. He says he has 500 word tracks that if you memorize these things, if a customer says it, you can respond with this. I'm like, you know what? How about we listen to what they're actually saying and just respond naturally? Right? And word tracks are fine if they're done in that type of context. So that's why I created this. I've seen a lot of things out there that people are just trying to manipulate people into buying something and convince them instead of actually having a good conversation. Understanding what their situation is, how you benefit it, and why that then is important for them to work with you. The next thing in the fourth step is invite more information. I can guarantee you don't understand everything your customer is telling you. You make assumptions about what they're saying because that's how we're conditioned. We're conditioned to fill in gaps by making assumptions based on previous experiences. But your conversation with this client is different from your conversation with the previous client. So invite more information. What do you mean by that? Could you explain that a little bit further to me? I don't want to feel pressured. So can you explain previous experiences where you felt pressured on that? Could you describe that to me a little bit better? That way you understand what they mean by being pressured. Because we may not necessarily understand the same words the same way based on our experiences. So invite more information. You can also, and the fifth thing is to ask clarifying questions. And this is a good one, like you were talking about, John, where you rephrase it in a question. So I'm hearing you say this. Is that correct? No. Okay, well, do you mind clarifying that for me? And then the cycle just continues like that until you understand. The other side is awareness. And these are 5 steps as well. The first one is to be aware of your sensory information, the experience that you're having. What does the room look like or the location look like? What is all the information that's going on around you? This is a tool that I used whenever I did counsel families and parents with kids and stuff like that. If you are able to put into words what your observations are, then everything else from here falls into place. So what I'm seeing is this. Well, I see you went into that room and got out real quick. That's an observation, right? Which probably indicates they're not interested. Or I see you're leaning back, because you can even draw attention to body language if it's in the right context and the right setting. This is what I'm observing, right? So I see you lean back a little bit. That makes me think, which is the second thing, your thoughts. That makes me think you're not really interested in this location. Is that correct? Then it goes into that conversation. Your thoughts lead to an emotion. And we talked about this last week, right? You have a thought. That thought is based on the observations that you've experienced, and this goes back to those mental models, that mental model map. Your thought leads you to a feeling. Differentiate between these two when you're talking with your clients. Because if you tell a client, well, I feel like you're not interested, that's not a feeling, that's a thought. It seems to me this. This is what I think. Does that make you feel uneasy a little bit? Is the feeling. And if you differentiate between those two, you will capture, because everything is based on feelings. We buy everything, which is going to come out next week. We buy everything based on emotion. 100%. And I'll explain why later, but this is where you have to differentiate, because if you're just talking thoughts and you don't get into the actual feeling of it, then you're going to miss out. And you won't be able to go forward, because the next step in this is to discuss what you want. And here's, this then leads to wants, right? And it's not only what you want for yourself or somebody else. And there's 3 areas that you want to focus on when you get to this part of the conversation. So this is my observation. It makes me think you're not really interested, or it makes me think that you're excited about it, or it makes me think this, which gets me excited, or makes me feel a little bit apprehensive about going forward, or whatever it might be. Acknowledge what the feeling is. So here's what I want for us. This is what I want. I want to make sure that I put you in the right house, in the right budget. This is what I want for you, and I want it for me because we're in this together. So you want for what your wants are for you, your client, and your relationship. And this will go into any conversation that you have. I mean, it could be with your spouse, it could be with a friend, it could be with a client, whatever it is. If you express it in these ways, here's what I want. I want to make sure that I sell you a good house. But I want it to make sure, I want you to be in love with it and for it to fit within your budget, so that we can have a great relationship together even after this, and I can help other family members or other friends get into their own places. That's what you want. I want to have this relationship with you for a long time. That's what I mean by you, the client, and the relationship between you. And if you express it this way, again, they can't help but connect with you and say, you know what, you're the person. I'm going to buy from you. It just goes in that direction, because then this then leads to the action and outcome. So here's our plan. This is how we're going to do it. And this is the outcome that we're expecting. And then I love this aspect of it. All of this, and it leads to how I define what communication actually is. And there's a couple definitions on that page for you. First of all, communication is the process by which we assign or convey meaning so that we can come to a shared understanding through a common experience. That's all communication is. It's not about agreeing. It's not about convincing someone of your position. It's not about being liked or anything like that. It is about how you convey and assign meaning so that you can come to a shared understanding. Shared understanding means that you understand one another through a common experience. And a common experience and the reason that we're here today is buying a house. Here's the other side of communication. The result of communication is not only coming to a shared understanding in that, it is clarity. Clarity is the purpose of communication. And one way I heard someone talk about clarity is having a new understanding of the situation. And I put that little reminder in there. Your client is an active participant in creating that new understanding and having clarity. Because you want your client to see their situation in a different perspective so that they understand why it's important to buy from you instead of someone else.
So,
This will come out a little bit in 2 weeks whenever I talk about framing the offer,
okay.
but I will give a preview on that. And it comes out of last week's a little bit also.
Okay.
Let me see if I have.
Kind of going blind into it. I mean, there are other people that are also being offered. Of course, they can give you now there's information, so you're just having to come up with the best possible scenario
Right.
that they can also afford and feel comfortable with.
Our brains default to the negative.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I see that with his text.
So we automatically default to the negative. In fact, and here's the interesting thing. Your brain cannot not think about something when it's drawn attention to it. So for instance, you cannot not think about an elephant now that I just said elephant. You're forced to think about it. So whenever you have a negative response, your brain is forced to think about that, and it focuses on the negative side of it. Even in all of your experiences and past experiences, most of the most meaningful ones were negatively associated, even though they may have had a positive outcome later. But we remember them. So we think about the negative. What you want to do is you want to focus the attention to the positive. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. And I'm going to let you speak on this a little bit more because of your experiences with selling houses with it. But if you are able to focus your client onto the positive, because remember, what you focus it on is what they think about. My first thought is don't do it through text.
Okay.
Do it in person or on the phone.
Okay.
At the very least on the phone. If you can get together in person,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay.
But at the very least on the phone.
Okay.
The reason for that is because he needs to hear your voice. He needs to hear excitement.
Okay.
and see it if possible,
Okay.
right? So whenever you're focusing on it, you can change your language from the negative things. Instead of saying, I know we didn't get this, you can say, we're going forward to get another one.
Okay.
You see, that's how you change it in a positive direction. You may have to get back to what the actual situation is, even in your client's
That's true.
mind, because they may have
Go back to the
lost
motive.
that. They may have lost or forgotten what is my actual situation. And if you acknowledge, like he was saying, if you acknowledge, here's where your situation is. This is where it's at. These are the facts, so to speak. The observations that I'm seeing with your situation, which leads me to think we need to focus our attention in this direction. And I'm excited about doing it with you on this. What do you think? And if you focus, because if you focus on what the actual situation is, and you create then that belief in their mind by focusing, if you focus on the positive aspects of it, that will lead to a positive belief, which leads to faith, which then leads to anticipation, and then you can go forward with it.